All right, hey, going into the end of October here in the next couple weeks, and I got a request to do a video on deer calling. So rather than do some highly edited production here, I'm just going to do a quick overview of some of the calls that I use, how I make the sounds, and when to make the sounds. Now, if you haven't watched my other video on pre-rut blacktail rattling, I do go over some of this in there, but I would jump over and check that video out. I go into depth on rattling, but I want to talk about deer vocalizations a little bit. Apologize, I'm kind of losing my voice, but right now we're at October 18th, and so I kind of look at it like between now and say about the 24th, the pre-rut phase is starting to heat up, so you're going to see a lot of young bucks chasing does. You're going to hear a lot of deer running through the woods if you spend any time in your stands, and you're going to see a lot of deer crossing roads and doing different things. So the deer and buck sighting should start going up. As it relates to your calling, does aren't really ready to breed just yet. That doesn't happen until we get closer to November or into November. There are cases where deer will get bred end of October, as evidenced by early fawn dropping in the spring. So I guess my point is that when you're calling, you have to match your calling to the phase of the breeding cycle. And right now we don't have a bunch of does that are receptive for breeding, so you have to think about that with your calling and really try to emulate what's happening in the deer woods. So the first call that I'm going to make here is just a fawn ball, and this call can be utilized in the spring for predator calling. It can be used for a lot of things, but as it relates to blacktail deer hunting and deer hunting in general, fawns will call for their mothers when they're separated, or if they're agitated or something like that is going on. For some reason with blacktails, especially bucks, they will come to a fawn ball, and there's a couple different nuances to this call, but it basically sounds like this. And it's just a fawn calling for its mother. If you're new to game calling and you want to try something that's generally not going to make deer run away, a fawn ball can often work. And it often works in the pre-rut because bucks, again, are looking for does are near fawns. It all kind of adds up. I like to use a fawn ball when it's really rainy or windy or both, and I'm trying to get a sound that can carry out into the woods and penetrate some of that other noise. A lot of times bucks will just come and investigate that. So it's a real simple call. It's the Jones deer grunt call, but pile driver is the new name of the call made by Point Blank Hunting Calls. It's got an adjustable O-ring on this soundboard and a little mylar reed, and I have it adjusted all the way out on the end, and I inhale through the call so that I don't get a bunch of condensation buildup on the end of that reed. So I also find I have better control over the sound if I'm inhaling air through the call, and it really doesn't make any difference on the volume. You can make this extremely loud just inhaling a little harder. So that fawn ball is a call that I would say is usable between now and the end of the year. And again, if you're a predator hunter, spring bear hunter, getting on a point and doing a bunch of those, so you're gonna reach out there and you could call in cats and bears. So moving sort of down here, we're gonna get into a basic doe bleat, and doe bleats are generally a monotone type of a sound, almost like a sheep. Just kind of a very soft sound, very short. It's not a big long drawn out sound. You'll hear about estrus doe bleats and these long kind of. I don't typically make that sound in the woods because I'm not very confident with that. I like a short doe bleat that's just a social call to say, hey, I'm over here, and I think bucks can pick up on that, and it's just a safe call to use. I will say that I have spooked several does in over the years, blowing a fawn, or a doe bleat randomly. Now I don't know if that's because I'm blowing it at a time when they expect to see a doe, and or they know there's simply not another deer around them at that time. So I would say use it at your discretion. That said, as we get into the end of the month and into early November, obviously bucks are keying in on does. So I find the doe bleat later at the tail end of the pre-rut, going into sort of that early peak breeding phase, is when that's going to pay off most for you. So those are the basic sounds. Now I will talk about a buck grunt, but to be honest, blacktail bucks, even aggressive blacktail bucks, they don't grunt as loud as I've seen on a lot of the outdoor shows with whitetails. Gosh, some of the shows you see, these bucks are just whap, whap, whap. The guys are calling really loud, got the big tubes. You'll notice I took the tube off this call. I never use it with a tube, but this would be a typical buck grunt call that I would use. And I would only use this, honestly, if I see a buck out of range, I'm going to grunt. I'm going to grunt once or until I get his attention. So if I grunt, he doesn't look. Grunt again, he doesn't stop, he's just walking. I'm going to grunt loud enough incrementally until I get him to stop and turn my way. Then I'm not going to do another thing. I'm going to let him come to me. I'm going to let his curiosity get the best of him. You don't want to give yourself away at this point, because then he's going to come in kind of like a turkey, right? You only want to call enough to keep them coming and make them come and look for you. And that's what you want to do with your deer calling as well. So that basic buck grunt is like, and now if they're tending a doe, sometimes you'll hear that's usually when they're walking behind a doe. They'll buck frequently, or they'll grunt frequently. So you can try that. Generally, I call most deer in using a doe bleat, and you can use this call. It sounds just like I did before. Move your O-ring about midway down the soundboard, and just a soft and that usually gets it done. I use a different call when I'm hunting, or actually trying to call an animal. If I see a buck or I suspect a buck is nearby, I use a little open reed call that I've customized to be clipped onto my shirt or my hat or whatever, and that way it's over here. When I draw my bow, it's out of the way. But it basically is just a soft little doe bleat. I've called in more bucks with this call, with that doe bleat sound, in the first week in first week in November than probably any other time. But I'm going to be using this heavily going into next week. And as with all calling, I start off slow. I do a lot of listening, a lot of glassing from my stand. I want to see a deer well before it gets near me so that I can play my cards accordingly. Less is more with calling. I only call enough to elicit a response and then monitor that deer, whether it's going to come in or not. And I've had plenty of deer come in and just divert and turn and move away, and that's going to happen. But I'd rather have that happen than have a deer come in and win me or spook or some other way, some other scenario. So that's kind of really it, to be honest. I've written some game calling or blacktail calling tips and things like that on my website, where I've spent a little more time kind of digging into the timing and the detail, which I would encourage you to go read those things if you're interested in calling in a blacktail. We're getting into the prime time, the last week of October. I've said this before, it's probably the best time to catch a mature buck during daylight hours with its guard down. The only other time I can say that is that late rifle season. It's a 4-day season in November, kind of early mid-November, and that I've shot a number of deer during that period of time as well. And again, I'm calling those deer in exclusively with doe bleeds, and I've had plenty of shot opportunities present themselves simply by going into an area, keeping the wind in my face, doing a few soft doe bleats, and listening. Rattling, again, I incorporate a lot of rattling, especially last week in October. I get pretty aggressive, but I'm not going to get into that here because this is just kind of a quick and dirty video. So anyway, hope that helps. If you have any questions, get a hold of me through my website, tom@pnwbowhunting.com, and I'd be happy to answer your questions. Thank you.